Well, thank you, Pat, and good morning. When our plane touched down in the capital city of Kigali, I'm not quite sure what I expected to see, but I didn't expect to see what we saw. Beautiful skyline, brand new buildings, cranes in the sky, new roads that were built, a bustling citizenry, and an unmistakable sense of hope and optimism. And it wasn't always this way. At the Berlin Conference in 1884, the European nations got together to carve up Africa for colonialization. The Germans got Rwanda. And when the Germans arrived, they found 3 tribes there. The majority Hutu, or farmers, the Tutsi, or cattle herders, and then the indigenous Twa. Next slide. The Germans, believing the Tutsi to be of Caucasian origin, thought they were racially superior to the Hutus. So it was no longer about being farmers and cattle herders, it was about skin pigmentation. It was about the width and length of one's nose. After World War I, the Belgians came in and took over from Germany, and they found it convenient to continue with the racial divide, such that every Rwandan had an ID that said you're either Hutu or Tutsi. In 1962, as one African nation after another got its independence, is when Rwanda did. This was following those 75 years of racial divide. And so the seeds were sown for a series of civil wars that ultimately ended in a tragic genocide 32 years later. I want you to consider some numbers here. The first is the date that the genocide began, April 6, 1994. The second is the percentage of DNA that all human beings share with one another. 99.5% of our DNA is identical to every other human on the planet. And yet we choose to focus on that last remaining 0.5% to define how we are different. We fight wars over that 0.5%. The next number is the number in millions of Rwandans, overwhelmingly Tutsi, who perished in the genocide. The next number is the percent of the population that number represented. 20% of the Rwanda population perished. There wasn't a single family that wasn't directly impacted by the genocide. And the final number there is how many days it lasted until it was over. 100 days. And in the period leading up to the genocide and throughout until it was over, not a single civilized country, including the US, did anything. How does one recover from a tragedy of that magnitude? How does a nation rebuild itself? How does a neighbor get over the hatred? And I don't know the answer to that. But what I learned when we went to the Kigali Genocide Memorial was an incredible story of peace and reconciliation. And it starts with a leader, in this case Paul Kagame, whose mantra was and is to this day, we are no longer Hutus and Tutsi, we were all Rwandans. And then it's thousands of acts of courage between individuals in reconciliation, where perpetrators confess their crimes to their victims' families, and victims gave their forgiveness. Next slide. Consider this couple. That's Dominique on your left and Consilde on your right. Dominique had killed Consilde's husband and destroyed her home. and they came together for reconciliation. Dominique. The day I thought of asking pardon, I felt unburdened and relieved. I had lost my humanity because of the crime I had committed, but now I am like any human being. Concilde. After I was chased from my village and Dominique and others looted it, I became homeless and insane. Later, when he asked my pardon, I said, I have nothing to feed my children. Are you going to help raise my children? Are you going to build a house for them? The next week, Dominique came with some survivors and former prisoners who had perpetrated genocide. There were more than 50 of them, and they built my family a house. Ever since then, I have started to feel better. I was a dry stick. Now I feel peaceful in my heart, and I share this peace with my neighbors. I'm going to move over here. I want to tell the story of Percasey. So Percasey was a weaver, and she found reconciliation through weaving. She would gather groups of Hutu and Tutsi women together, and they would weave these baskets that are now known as a peace basket. And this is a set of nested baskets. There are 5 of them, representing the generations past, present, and future of Rwandan women who are committed to rebuilding the country that they love. Speaking of women, 64% of the elected legislature in Rwanda are women. That's the highest in the world by over 10%. The world's average is 22%. Yeah. Here in the US, we're 18. One of the things that I've learned as a result of being involved in this development work is that if you want to change the world, start with women and then mobilize everyone. I'll move back here. When Chuck had asked Pat and I to talk here, he explained that this was the end of a series on living gratefully, and that would we share if there was someone that we were grateful for, and that moment in your life when you sort of got it, you were hit by this. And frankly, that's an easy question for me. And while there's so many people in this world for whom I'm grateful, next slide, there are 2 that have impacted me more than any others, and that would be my wife, Wendy, and our daughter, Kristen. Now, when Kristen graduated from the University of Texas, she announced that she was going to dedicate her life to the eradication of poverty through the NGO she had created in school, Feel Good. And I understand that last week at New Church Live, students from the local chapter of Feel Good came here and served grilled cheese sandwiches. That's awesome. So when she told this to us, Wendy and I said, we better go check this out. So next slide. We traveled to Africa, and here we're standing in front of an epicenter that's built by the Hunger Project, and we are there for its dedication. This is in Mozambique. And we were joined there by other investors of the Hunger Project, as well as Wendy's father, the former executive bishop of the new church, Bishop King. And that man in the front is the former president of Mozambique, Joaquim Chissano. We spent 2 weeks traveling throughout Mozambique and Malawi, witnessing the incredible work that happens when you empower people to be the architects of the end of their own poverty. That was the moment in which Wendy and I both got it. And once you got it, you can never go back. Next slide. On the way home in the airplane, Wendy's had this vision, the In My Lifetime campaign, which was to raise money with the goal of eradicating poverty in Africa. I'm going to move one more time. It was 4.5 years ago that I stood on this spot in this building. The occasion was Wendy's remembrance service. 2 years after we returned from Africa, she was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and 18 months later, she passed away. And during that remembrance service, I told a couple of stories. And amazingly, 2 of them have to do with this building. The first occurred over 40 years ago. It was the first time I laid eyes on Wendy. And back then, this building was an old, beat-up gymnasium. And the society would get together on Friday nights for a dinner and Bible study. And if you wanted a date on Friday night, you had to be going to Friday supper. And if you thought you were pretty smart, you left before Bible study. Well, that night I had a date. It wasn't Wendy. And I thought I was pretty smart, so we left right after dinner. And as we were leaving, up walks this gorgeous woman in this unforgettable red dress. I was later to find out that that was Wendy King. And 1 year later, we were married. Fast forward several years, and as fate would have it, Wendy becomes the development officer of the Academy of the New Church, who owns this building. And in that capacity, she led an effort of a capital campaign, which, among things, converted the old gymnasium into this incredible Mitchell Performing Arts Center. And then fast forward many years after that, and I'm standing here on this stage recounting our life of 35 years together, a life well lived. Last time. Chuck had asked and mentioned that this service would be about paying it forward, and perhaps we'd want to say something about paying it forward. And if I could have a slide here. This is the picture of Wendy that was present during her service. So paying it forward, having been to Malawi and Mozambique with the Hunger Project, having been to Bolivia and then Rwanda with Water for People, having seen the transformative work of empowering people to end their own hunger, having witnessed that a women first, mobilize everyone strategy leads to lasting change, having a wife and been married to the woman I love most in the world, and having a daughter who is kind of a mirror image of her mother, and a person who's better than I could ever hope to become. I'm compelled. I am driven. I am committed to paying it forward by spending my time towards working to eradicate extreme poverty. In September, 193 countries came together and they signed on to what is now known as the Sustainable Development Goals, which have as their ultimate end the eradication of extreme poverty by the year 2030. And that's only 15 years away. And while it's too late for Wendy's lifetime, it's not too late for me. This is where I will pay it forward. This will happen. And one last thing. Next slide. Whoops. I have to read this. On Wendy's memorial plaque, it says, "She believed the problems of the world could be solved through the empowerment of women and love." She was right. final slide. If you have come to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let's work together. This is the spirit that has led to peace and reconciliation in Rwanda. This is the spirit that drives the work of the Hunger Project and Water for People. And this is the spirit where, together, working with our brothers and sisters, in which our liberation is bound up with theirs, that we can pay it forward. And I hope you'll join me. And by join me, I mean find that thing in yourself that you are deeply passionate about. Find that place in your heart where is your true self. Find that place where your liberation is bound up with humanity. And then pay it forward. Please join me. Thank you.